I'm Jackson Miller, and today I'll be teaching about operating at a controlled airport, and more specifically, communication. Now, for many student pilots or people who trained at a non-towered airport, it may seem kind of scary and nerve-wracking to talk to these controllers. But it's important to remember, they're people just like us, so they'll understand if you're having a little bit of a hard time. But it's important to keep your communication clear and concise. Now, I was fortunate enough to train at a towered airport, but I am no means an expert, so I'll do my best to share my knowledge with people like you. Now, the first thing a pilot's going to want to do is get the ATIS. Now, ATIS is the weather information, and it'll be followed by a letter identifier. This is a useful tool for a pilot to use when they first transmit to the controller. So the information will be labeled something like Tango, Zulu, or Bravo. Now, after you get the information, you'll want to contact the ground controller. Ground controller will be the one that will give you the taxi clearance out to the runway, as well as make sure that you avoid any other traffic on the ground. Your first call will start with who you're talking to. Now, for these examples, I'll use Renton since I'm very familiar with using them in my calls. So you call up Renton Ground. You then state who you are and what type of plane you're flying. So that'd be an Archer, a Warrior, maybe a Skyhawk, or a Skycatcher. So for this, I am Skycatcher 162 Hotel Alpha. You're going to then want to put where you're at. This is important so the controller can know where you're on the airfield and how to taxi you to the active runway. So I am at the Windsock parking. You want to follow that with the information you have. Well, I got information Bravo, so I want to tell the controller that. Then follow that by the direction of flight you wish to have on your departure. I want to go northbound. So your first call will go something like Renton Ground, Skycatcher 162 Hotel Alpha at Windsock Parking, northbound departure. Now, if you do request flight following on your departure, then you should add that in at the very end. Renton Ground, Skycatcher 162 Hotel Alpha with information Bravo, northbound departure, requesting flight following. The controller will come back and say, Skycatcher 162 Hotel Alpha, Renton Ground, taxi to the runway, say runway 16, via, and then he'll give you a couple taxiways, maybe Alpha, maybe Bravo to Tango. And you'll have to repeat this back to him. Now, if you requested flight following, he may also say, where is your destination airport? This will help for him to input it into the database, so when he passes you on to the tower, and the tower passes you on to departure, they can know where you're going to go in the end. Now, if you are taxiing at an airport with lots of different taxiways, and you're unfamiliar with how to get to your runway, you can ask for progressive taxi. This will help by the controller giving you more information on how to get through your route to the runway without having any runway incursion. Now, you are still responsible to make sure that you do not go onto an active runway or pass through a hold sign, and it is important that you pay attention to where you're taxiing. Some towers also use non-standard taxi procedures during busy days or when they don't have enough taxiways. At Renton, it was common for us to be advised to use the right side of the taxiway, that way we could pass another plane going the opposite direction. Now, this won't happen at all towered airports, but you should be aware that this could happen and that you should do as the controller advises. If you are unsure what the controller is asking, tell him that and stop in that position, and that way he can explain it to you and we can continue on safely. Now, after you taxi out, you'll get to a run-up area, or maybe you'll do a run-up on a taxiway. After that, you'll pull up to the hold short line for the runway. As you're pulling up, you can switch over to tower frequency. Now, At certain airports, you may be advised to switch over to tower frequency prior, but if you're not, this is a good time to do it. When you switch over to tower frequency, you're going to want to say your full call sign, even if it's the same controller, but full call sign and that you're holding short of the runway. You can also say your direction of flight, just in case you haven't said it before, or if you're unsure. The controller will come back and say continue to hold short or cleared for takeoff. If they do say cleared for takeoff, it is important that you listen to make sure they know your direction of flight. Say cleared for takeoff, northbound departure. Maybe you're planning for a southbound departure and you messed it up. Before you're departing, make sure you clear that up with the controller so that you both know where you are going and there won't be any traffic conflicts. If the controller says hold short, make sure you repeat that back to him and that you continue holding and looking on final to see where the traffic is. Just make sure that you aren't going to have a runway incursion and that you stay safe. Now, after you depart and you're leaving the airspace or you're getting flight policy, the controller will advise you to switch frequencies, and this will allow you to talk to the new controller, or simply to no longer talk to this controller and be on a common area traffic frequency and listen for other people. The controller may also advise you of traffic as you leave into a non-controlled airspace and into a high-density area. Now, if you do leave the airspace and the controller has not advised you to change, but you are clear by at least a mile, you can change frequencies. Alright, now let's talk about lost comms when you're on the ground or when you're on your departure. Now, in certain situations, you may wish to depart an airport without using radio communications, even though it's controlled and towered. Now, this requires you to make special arrangements with the tower prior to departure. And with this, you'll see different light gun signals, such as steady green, meaning you're cleared for takeoff, or flashing green, meaning you're cleared to taxi on the route that you discussed with that controller. A steady red will mean that you should stop where you are, and a flashing red will be to taxi clear the runway if you're already on it. Now, another one is flashing red and green. Now, this means to exercise extreme caution. And this signal can be seen anywhere, whether you're on the ground, on your departure, or in the air at all. Now, you also may see a flashing white light. This means to return back to where you started. Now, in other cases, you may lose your communication in radio while you're on the ground unexpectedly. It is important that you look for these signals. You most likely will not see a steady green light that will tell you to take off because you don't wish to take off. And this can happen for many reasons. Many people will, during a run-up, find an anomaly, circuit breaker might flip and will want to return, as well as you may turn down the radios for a minute and forget to turn it back up. Now, if you do have a radio communication failure, you should try and fix the problem. Troubleshoot and see if you can see anything that went wrong. Of course, if this doesn't work, or if you're in a dangerous situation, it's important that you squawk 7600. This will let all controllers in the area know that you are no longer having effective radio communication through your device. Either you're not able to transmit or you're not able to receive. Now, if you're on departure and you have this, a good thing to do would be to circle around in the pattern. The controller will understand when you squawk 7600 that you are having radio communication failure. And then if you make a regular pattern, you'll understand where you're going and where you will be. It's important though that you do look down at the tower for light gun signals. Now these light guns are rated for 5 miles during the day. So you should be able to clearly see them inside most Delta airspace and near many other airports. Now in the air, you look for different things. A steady green light, instead of being cleared for takeoff, will be cleared to land. Flashing green will be to return for landing if you're circling just outside. A steady red will be give way and continue circling, meaning you'll have different traffic near you and you should be aware of it. A flashing red means it's unsafe to land at this airport at this time. This would be good to depart out in a standard way. That way the controller will not have to divert traffic around you. And you can go to another towered airport or uncontrolled airport. Now, flashing light is not used while you're in the air, so you will not see that one. But you will still see alternating between red and green, meaning to exercise extreme caution. During these times, the controller will try and move traffic out of your way, but it is still your responsibility to make sure you don't hit anyone else. Alright, next thing I want to talk about is if you're coming back to an airport. Now, at different airports and different sizes, you'll be talking to different people. For example, if you're coming into a Charlie airport, you'll need to talk to an approach controller first. If you're going into a Delta airport, you'll most likely just talk straight to the tower. And on occasion, when you go into a Bravo airport, you'll either talk to tower or approach, depending on where you are and how you're doing this. Now, the first thing you want to do is, again, get the weather information. Yes, you can get that letter code. That way when you make your first call, they know that you know what's going on at the airport. On that initial contact with tower, you'll say who you are, who they are, where you are, and what your plan is, along with the weather information. So, in my example of a Delta airport arrival, you'll say something like Renton Tower, Skycatcher 162 Hotel Alpha, 10 miles to the north at 2,500, with information Echo, full stop landing. Now, this will tell the controller what your altitude is too, as well as your position. That way they can identify you on their radar, or plot it out if they don't have a radar, as well as that you just want to do a full stop landing when you come into the airport, and that you will not be adding into their pattern. Now, most often when you establish communication, the controller will come back and say, make an arrival, or make a procedure entry into the pattern for the airport. Although at some airports, if they are very busy, or they are doing an IFR departure from a VFR tower, they will tell you to remain outside the airspace. Now, this means that you just need to hold outside and wait for your clearance to come back in. It does not mean you're being denied to land at the airport. Just not at this time can you land there. Now, when you contact an approach controller to make a landing in an airport, another important thing to mention in your call is what airport you intend to land at. Now, a controlling agency may control many airports in a different approach region. So, if you're going into Portland International or Troutdale, you can contact the Portland approach controller. It's important that you say, requesting landing at Troutdale Airport. That way they know you're going to Troutdale, not Portland or any other airport nearby. Now, when you enter the airspace, it's important that you get permission for different areas. For going into a Charlie airport, they may say, remain clear of the Charlie at this time, meaning do not go into the airspace yet. When you're going into a Bravo airport, they need to say, cleared into the Bravo, for you to be able to enter the airspace. This is important relation and information. And when you come back with your reply, you need to say, cleared into the Bravo. When you enter the airspace, the next thing you're going to want to do is look for traffic in the area that the controller will advise you about. Controllers will often point out the traffic to you, and vice versa, point out you to other traffic. This is important when you're going into an airport and you need to follow someone in the pattern. They'll go, Skycatcher, there is a Cessna on downwind 2 miles at your 11 o'clock. Report traffic in sight. Once you report that traffic in sight, they may say follow that traffic on the downwind. Now remember, following a traffic does not mean you get permission to do what they're doing. It just means that you need to stay behind them and keep them in sight. Once you're in the pattern, you will often get clearance to land or to continue. Now, At different airports, it may be common to only clear 1 or 2 planes to land at a time, but at different airports, it may also be common to land 6 or 7 planes at a time. In my experience, I've been able to be cleared to land number 6, which means 6 people ahead of me cleared to land. This is important because I need to make sure that I don't cut off anyone and that everyone stays in order. Now, I have been cleared to land, but if I do come by and the controller does release a plane in front of me and I feel it is unsafe to land at the time, I can go around. Just because I'm cleared to land doesn't mean I have to land. Now, when you're in the traffic pattern at a towered airport, it may have some non-standard procedures, or simply some non-standard moves as they change runways or have different traffic departing and leaving. Now, if it's a VFR tower and they're departing IFR flight, it may request that you leave the airspace for the moment while they remove this traffic, or simply do a couple circles outside of the traffic pattern. Now, if you do have to leave the airspace, make sure you listen to the tower as he clears other traffic from the airspace and where they're going. That way you can look for them and stay a good safe distance away from them and not have any collisions just out while you're all holding out there. Now, if the controller needs to change the runways to the opposite direction, it may ask you to do a 180. It's important that if there's traffic behind you, that you know that they're there and that you're able to spot them as you come back around. Now, when you land, you'll need to get taxi permission to go back to your parking spot. There's 2 ways that this is done. One is you'll exit the runway and come to a stop, and the tower will give you an advisory to change to the ground frequency and call them up. From there, you will tell them that this is Skycatcher 162 Hotel Alpha on Alpha 6 to taxi to your parking, Windsock Parking. From here, the controller will come back and say, taxi via this route. Now, if you're still confused or this is a new airport, don't forget about that progressive taxi and that you can call them up and say, I'm unsure of where I'm going. Now, another way this is done is the controller will tell you how to taxi to your parking. It'll ask you where you're parking, followed by Skycatcher 162 Hotel Alpha, taxi to parking via Bravo. Monitor ground. This means that you do not have to contact ground once you leave the runway, but you need to listen just in case they have extra directions for you. Oftentimes, you will not have to communicate with them at all. So, let's talk about lost comms on your arrival, in the pattern, or after landing. While you're on arrival and you lose comms, and if you're getting given direction, make sure you follow those directions and that you make it as standard as possible. If you're making a standard arrival, a controller will understand where you plan to go and what your intentions are. It's still important that you look for these light gun signals to make sure that you follow the controller's direction. If you're outside the airspace still and you're unsure if you've got a clear procedure arrival or don't understand how to enter this airport, you can go out and circle a little bit and try and create a plan of entry. This is also a good time if you have your phone on you to try and call the tower or airport and let them know of your situation. And make sure you squawk 7600, that way they know you have lost radio communication. Now, there are different ways to acknowledge these light gun signals as you make your arrival. One would be to dip your nose, as in a nodding formation. This will let the controller know that you understand what you're about to do. If you decide to fishtail the plane a little bit, that will indicate to the controller you don't know what you're doing right now and that you cannot accept this clearance they're trying to give you. Rocking your wings, so tell them that you received the message that they sent and that you understand. And if you make a right hand 360, that'll indicate you got the message, but you're still unsure. Now, as you look for these light gun signals and you make your approach, understand that the controller will be busy also moving aircraft out of the way. and it's important that you still look for these like signals, but it may be hard to see in the daylight, but he's still trying to make sure that you arrive safely. Now, if you lose your comms after landing, just look up to that tower again, and you should see a flashing white light. That'll mean the controller wants you to go to parking. Go back to the parking spot you came from if you left from that airport, or to the nearest parking available. Now, personally, I fly with this knee board. This knee board by ASA contains a lot of good information. It has Lycon signals, it has flight plan information, it has all the letters along with their phonetic abbreviation and Morse code signal. That way, if you're listening to BORs and other things, you can know what's going on. Now, it's helpful if you lose communication because it has those Lycon signals, which can be hard to remember. But always remember that it's always about safety and getting things done correctly. It's not about rushing to make sure everyone's happy. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed. Thank you very much.